Our next class is entitled Linkpendium. Our presenter is Rayanne Melick, who loves family history. Her particular interest is in Eastern European history and research, which initially started because of the crazy family surnames on her paternal lines. However, she loves dabbling in all areas of the world and helping other people do the same. Rayanne also loves to travel. She's definitely a history nerd and loves to learn what makes other countries tick, probably a product of her degree in psychology and love of people in general. She's currently a service missionary at the BYU Family History Library, a volunteer with the Utah Family Technology and Genealogy Group, and is a registrar of the Foundation for East European Family History Studies. Last but not least, Rayanne has the best job in the world, teaching 8 little people, her grandkids, to recognize and love her ancestors. We're thankful and appreciative of her sharing her time with us today. And I'll turn the time over to Rayanne.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Okay, this class is an update from 2019, and it looks like the founders of Linkpendium, who created the Roots Web genealogical website in 1996, have been hard at work these last 4 years. In case you didn't know, Roots Web merged with Ancestry in June of 2000. So this has been around for a long time. So Linkpendium, I'm sure some of you probably haven't ever heard of it. It is an online directory of links to genealogical resources. It was founded by Karen Isaacson and Brian Wolf Leverage, creators of the Roots Web genealogical website. Linkpendium's goal is incredibly lofty. It's to index every genealogy, family history, family tree, surname, vital records, biography, or otherwise genealogically related site on the internet. Now, if you think about that, that is quite a goal. If you look at that quote, that direct quote from their website, you're saying, wait a minute, genealogy is up there twice. That's not a typo. That's straight from their website. So if you look at this, you're also thinking, wait a minute, this looks an awful lot like Cindy's list. So what's the difference? Here are the differences between Linkpendium versus Cindy's list. Cindy's list is strongest at the state or topic level. Linkpendium is strongest at the county level. So think of them as complementary sites, not direct competitors. You will want to use both of them, but don't take my word for it. Do a little research on your own. Both sites have the ability to add or suggest fixes for links. So this is the Linkpendium website. What a funny name. So what is Linkpendium anyway? It is a 10 million plus resource directory to everything on the web about families worldwide, and it has genealogically relevant information. It has a strong emphasis on free resources provided by libraries, government agencies, genealogical and historical societies, and individuals. It has indexes to online biographies. And so with all of this information, how in the world do you use it? Well, at the top, you have an ability called the Family Discoverer to search for last names, search for family names. Then you also have the ability to search by city or county or family surname. You have an ability to search locality. You have the ability to search surnames. So if you look at this, up at the top, you can search for surname here. You can search for surname here. You've got a Family Discoverer up here. You've got Family Discoverer here. So there's multiple ways to search. You've got city or county localities down here by state. You can jump to a city here. You can jump to a county here. Multiple ways. The one important thing that you want to remember is when you're looking to break down a brick wall, look at this important spot right here. The locality and family surname pages include many resources that could not be included in the search engine. When you are trying to break down a genealogical brick wall, Always use the locality and family surname pages in addition to the family discoverer, which is up here and over here. That is just a very brief start of this. So let's go ahead and more of this, the surnames worldwide. If you take a look, you can see you've got links through the whole alphabet. And you can link to surnames without diacritics or with diacritics. Then you also have this strange outdoor links activities, which you're kind of looking at and going, okay, outdoor links. Why would we have that? More on that later. Also hiking trails for any of you who are exercise buffs. And then you have what's happening at Linkpendium. And they do update this regularly. It'll tell you what they've been doing and a lot of maintenance that's on the site. So that's just kind of start on what Linkpendium is all about. So let's get into the meat of how you use this site, because I know it's one of those little known gems in the genealogy world. I know some of you have never heard of it. And for me, I think I discovered it at about 1999 when I saw it referenced somewhere. And it's kind of a quirky site, but it is a lot of fun to play with. So let's go ahead and see what we can do with it. So here's what I did. I started with my maiden name, which is Brunsky. And I thought, let's just throw it in the Family Discoverer, and which has over 2 million genealogy resources there. And I thought, we'll start with Brunsky and worldwide and put something in, see what we can find. And I scrolled down the first page and I thought, not seeing anything. Michael Brunsky, not the one I need. Don't know of any Brunskys in Hawaii. Kept on going. Decided to go to the next page. And I thought, okay, keep on going. And I got to the very last one. And the New Jersey Obituary and Death Notice Archive. And what I found was in the very bottom, there was a mention of a sister, Helen Brunsky, and her brother, Johnny Bargella or Bargella, depending on who said that. And I thought, that looks interesting. Let's take a look. And so I did. So here is that obituary. This was for a Josephine Bargella Shamansky. And what do you find? What do you take a look at when you look at obituaries? I love obituaries. What can we learn from obituaries? We learn more about family members. We learned Josephine's death date, where she lived, general things about her life, her religious affiliation, and some general personal traits. I think this reminds us to take the time to carefully read obituaries and other items that we might find so that we can mine out all of the pertinent information. Okay, so I learned that she was 84 years old. She died on Friday, April 8th. And I learned that she was born in Passaic, New Jersey, and she lived in Kenilworth for 52 years. And I learned that she worked for Keen Lighting, and she retired in 1984. Now, if we're looking for just the names, dates, and places, well, we've got name, we've got dates, we've got places. And some people would say, well, got that, stop. Don't need to read anymore. But we want to remember that these were living, breathing people, and we want to mine everything we can. We want to know all about them. And even though this is a sister of my aunt, I still want to know about this person. I learned that she was very caring and loving. She was a mother, grandmother, sister, aunt, and friend. And I also noticed that whoever wrote this put in that this was Helen Brunsky. It's actually Helene Brunsky, but I also had a name of a brother, Johnny, that I never knew about. I also learned that Josephine had a son, Daniel, and his wife. I didn't know that. I didn't know that she had a son-in-law, Richard. So I learned She had a sister, Violet. I didn't know that. I didn't know where she lived either. And then 3 grandchildren were named. So there's a lot of things that you can learn from obituaries, which I kind of love obituaries to say that. My kids think I'm weird, but that's okay. Most kids think their parents are weird anyway. So let's go ahead and take a look at a different kind of information. So again, I put another one of my names in to the Family Discoverer. This time it's Shaquitas. And entering the name Shaquitas, I came up with a Joseph Shaquitas in the death index. Let's go back to that one just a second. The death index for Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. And this was found on genealogy trails. And in case you're interested, if you'll notice at the bottom, it says the search took 18 milliseconds, according to the website. So Joseph Shaquitas looks like he died on October 24th of 1930 in Wanami, and that's Pennsylvania, age 64 of complications. Now I have to tell you a personal story about this Joseph Shaquitas. When I found this was my very first deep dive into family history on this side of the family. I had been working on family history since probably the mid 70s, but it was always on my mom's side of the family. My dad's side of the family was from Pennsylvania. They were coal miners. They were Roman Catholic, and I didn't know a whole lot, except I was always enamored with that side of the family, but didn't know much. And so this was my first spot to say, oh, maybe I can find more about this person. At that time, I also learned that it was $25 to the state of Pennsylvania for each death certificate that you wanted to find. So I thought, well, that would be a good way to use my money. All of that, lots of money I did not have, but I thought it's worth it. So I decided to start looking in to see what I could find out about him. What kind of complications did he die of? So here's my death certificate that I wrote for. And I found that he died of pneumonia. It says lobar pneumonia. Well, I looked that up, and pneumonia, put those together, and I couldn't tell if it was labor or lobar. But anyway, he worked for the Glen Alden Coal Company, and he was 64 years old when he died. 64 is not very old, but I learned really fast with the history that, you know what? A coal miner, that is a hard life. And I suspect that the coal dust contributed to the problems with his lungs. And so that was fun to have that. That was the first one in my stack of many death certificates from Pennsylvania. So I thought, oh, I'm on a roll. This started the thrill of the hunt, and I needed more. This was my next thing that I found. I found Joseph in the 1930 census, and he is on line 45, and he's Joe Sr. father living with Joe Jr. and his wife Frida, and he is a widower at this point. So that also told me at that point, okay, where does his wife go? So somewhere along the way, his wife passed away, and I need to figure that one out. Where did she go? The next thing I found was an obituary for him. And he lived in a small coal and mining town. And I found that in this obituary, he says that he was a prominent resident of this town. His mass was at St. Mary's Lutheran Church, and the attendance was one of the largest that they had seen in Wanami in recent months. There were numerous floral tributes, and it also said that he was one of the founders of the church and its societies. And that was interesting for me to know, because then I could go back and look at when the church was started and learn a little bit about that. I also read in this that flowers were carried by, and then they named some names, and then there was an Anthony and a Frank Shaquitas, who I later learned that those were brothers. I also learned as I went along in this path that Anthony and Joseph, I think all of my great uncles are named Anthony and Joseph. It's crazy. They recycled names over and over and over. But this was my golden find. I was thrilled when I found this, and this was in an aunt's attic. And I had to practically promise her the sun, the moon, the stars, and my children to get a copy of this picture. This is Joseph and his wife in the middle, and then his children's spouses standing behind him, and his grandchildren. And I was very lucky that I was able to correspond by letter with his youngest grandchild, who is the little girl on Joseph's left hand. I corresponded with her twice before she passed away in 2006. So now let's jump to a county search. On the right-hand side, you jump to the second one down in the yellow. It says jump to a county. And so when I put in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, we end up with this set of links to look at. And Linkpendium has some of the most interesting things that you can find. When I first started looking at it, there were so many interesting things, and all 50 states and some countries are represented, but this had projects, adjacent counties, all sorts of things that you could look at. So I looked at projects, coal region of Pennsylvania. It had Luzerne County history and genealogy. And the first one I decided to look at was the Luzerne County history and genealogy link. So let's go ahead and go there. I saw this in about the year 2000, and this page is hosted by the Genealogy Trails. Now, they've now turned this into a legacy site, and so it's hosted by volunteers, and there's lots and lots of records on it. And when I first started looking at it, it had these different categories, and people would contribute. And as you can see at the bottom, it now has recent updates as of October 2022. Some of these categories hadn't been updated or added to in years. And that's because as the internet has grown over the 2000s and the 2010s and now into the 2020s, since it was bought by Ancestry, a lot of things have just been directly added into Ancestry or Family Search or other places. But I've got to tell you, so a lot of these pages are just static, which means nothing's been added to them, but the information here is still here and stays here, which is really nice. And somebody has added these recent updates on this too. So I tend to still look at this, and I still think Linkpendium has a great place for genealogy family history. So I want you to take a look at this. Mr. Peanut. Do you know that Mr. Peanut was from Pennsylvania? I fondly remember Mr. Peanut. The reason why I remember Mr. Peanut is because I used to have a Mr. Peanut cup, and it was plastic. It was red. It was in the shape of Mr. Peanut, and it had a straw that was attached to it. And it was red, and I thought it was the coolest thing because I didn't have to get an extra straw. It was attached, and it was so cool. And the outside of it felt like it had the covering like a peanut. And I used to drink my milk in the morning before school in that cup. Anyway, the Planters Peanut Company was founded by an Italian immigrant named Amedeo Obici in 1906 in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. So the Planters logo, Mr. Peanut, was created in a contest in 1916. The grade schooler, Antonio Gentile, and his family originally received $5 for winning the contest. Obici befriended them and paid Antonio's and 4 of his siblings' way through college. Obici also paid Antonio's way through medical school, as well as Antonio, as he became a doctor. Unfortunately, I looked, and I think Antonio actually passed away in 1934. But the interesting thing about this is it's one of those pieces of information that it's just one of those extra pieces of information that lends a little bit of interest to stories. the fact that I found this and I had a Mr. Peanut cup. My dad was from that area. When he was visiting one time, he brought us Mr. Peanut cups home. So it may not apply to anybody or everybody, but I had a story for it. So it was really fun for me to find. And I wouldn't have found that anywhere else, but I found it on Linkpendium. So before we get started with surnames, I want you to close your eyes. I want you to listen to this story. It's called A Tale of the Snow. And because I'm having trouble with my mouse and I can't see what's underneath, I'm going to have to just start that. Close your eyes and I'm going to read the story to you. It is from a newspaper, December 31st. It's talking about a woman who is walking. Here's the start of it without the first sentence. A woman is walking 2 feet in the snow with the thermometer at 0. And she doesn't want to disappoint the man who was willing to marry her. This, however, is what Miss Anna Barker, now Mrs. Samuel Collenbeck, did, and the story has just become known. She was to have been married at 8 o'clock in Parsons on last Thursday night to Samuel Collenbeck, a young miner of that place. For 2 days, I lost my place. For 2 days previous, she had been staying with relatives in Nanticoke, getting her wedding ferments ready. And on Wednesday evening, she left there and came to the city to take a car to Parsons. This was the night of the big storm, and the electric car was blocked. She could not get upon the car and went to the Jersey Central Depot, but the last train was gone. She was in a sad plight. There was no way of communicating with Parsons, and she had not money enough to engage a carriage. It was 7 o'clock, and she was to be married at 8, and Parsons was 6 miles away. The severe weather, however, was not to keep her from the man she loved, and she resolutely started to walk, first entrusting her bundles to the car of the station agent. There was nearly 2 feet of snow on the ground, and it was bitter cold, but she plodded along as best she could. After extreme exertion and suffering intensely from the cold, she reached Parsons at 10 o'clock. The church was closed, as she expected, but she walked on to the house of her lover, and there found it full of invited guests doing their best to console Kallenbach, who was almost heartbroken over what he considered the faithlessness of his intended bride. Soon she told the story, and the happy young man insisted on the marriage taking place at once. Miss Barker, of course, was willing, and after she put on some borrowed clothes, her own being cold and wet, the whole party went to the church. Reverend Father Keenan was aroused, and Miss Barker became Mrs. Collenbeck. Today, communications were restored with Parsons, and among the first carload of passengers were Mr. and Mrs. Collenbeck, who came down to get the happy bride's trousseau left in the hands of the station agent last Wednesday. Can you imagine what it would be like to find a story like that in your family history? It's a great story. But with our social media these days, where we write in, 2 sentences and emojis and abbreviations, we don't get that kind of writing like that anymore. So I think that is a great little find for that family. And no newspaper would write anything that long either, or they would charge you an arm and a leg for something like that. But I thought it was a fun little look into that person's life. Hey, let's take a look now at, before I get started with surnames, I want to mention the outdoor activities link for you. The creators of Linkpendium are big outdoor enthusiasts. They live at the top of a mountain above, I think, the LA area. They are big climbers and hikers, and they have lots of links, pictures, and information to hiking trails in the United States. And They have people send in descriptions of hikes and tell you about the hikes, go this way, don't go that way. That trail's really hard. This one's easy. Go up the backside, don't go up the front side, those kinds of things. But as for me, I think I'll let them exercise for me. I kind of believe in proxy exercise. So, okay, now let's take a look at the surname directory, which is above. You can use the Family Discover Worldwide, which we've used, or you can jump to the surname at the right in the yellow boxes. I also want to point out the diacritics. For those of you that may not be know what diacritics are, they are the signs that go over certain letters in a surname. You see them a lot in names from other countries. They can be an accent, an umlaut, or a tilde that can alert special pronunciation, unusual sounds, or stress to a certain letter. And so there are many types of diacritics that aren't common in the Roman alphabet. When you're faced with diacritics, it would be a good idea to take a minute and learn about them. Diacritics can help break down brick walls in your research by helping you understand how names were pronounced in the native tongue. In turn, they might spur other ideas on how records might have been indexed differently. So now let's take a look at some surnames, and I hope this gives you some ideas on what you can do with your surnames. So my last name, my maiden name is Brunsky, and this is the left hand of the screen. When you I put Brunsky in again in the surnames, and I just started scrolling down, and you'll see on this, you have to play with it a little bit till you get the hang of it, but you'll see that you'll start off with BRU. So I scrolled down through pages and pages till I got to BRU, and you see you have 19,000 names there. And then you just keep on scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and it'll go BRU. Then you'll get some with the diacritics, and then you'll see it keeps on going down BRU, BRV, BRW, and then it starts adding and going down through the alphabet. And you scroll and scroll and scroll, at least I did, till you got, Brunsing and Brunsink and Brunsky with an E, till I got to Brunsky family, surname, genealogy, family history, and there were 9 results. And so we want to take a look. And I looked through the 9 results, and the one that I picked to demonstrate was find a grave result. And it was for St. Mary's Cemetery in Wannabe, Pennsylvania. And it was the one that looked most promising. And it was the wife of my great uncle. And guess his name? Of course, his name was Joseph. And let's take a look at Marionette. Marionette, her married name is Brunsky, but look at her maiden name. She has a Polish maiden name. And I suspect that I could probably slaughter that pronunciation quite well. Because after all, I've lived with a simple name, Brunsky, being slaughtered my whole life. I can't imagine, really, what people would have done with the original, which was Burinskis. Not too hard, but it was easier to mess up. If I had a little knowledge about the native language, and if Google Translate or Deep Translate was around when I was growing up, maybe people wouldn't have slaughtered as much. But one of the things you want to do is think about how a native would have pronounced that surname. Remember that spellings weren't standardized, and many of our ancestors didn't have the opportunity for education. Also, mistakes were made when surnames were typed into databases, and in lots of cases, volunteers were non-Slavic language speaking volunteers. So try to think phonetically. So we get interesting information from this, but then we can also turn to something like this. So this is how her maiden name was spelled. And I'm going to attempt to say it. So the Polish according to, this is Google Translate, and it's Gojek. Okay, that would be the Polish, spoken by a very American. So Gojek in the Polish. Now, if you look at it, English pronunciation, person would look at that and they would say Gazdiaszek. So very, very different. So maybe when you come upon names that you're not quite sure about, try putting them in a translator and listen if you can, if they have that ability to see what it might be and see how you might be able to think how it could be spelled so that you could look it up and use the different ways to search phonetically, see if you could find records that way. So now let's talk about some of the funky things that I have found on Linkpendium. We all kind of drift toward the typical things that we think of for family history. We think of names, dates, and places. Therefore, we think of, certificates of all kinds. We think of, birth certificates, marriage certificates. We think of death certificates. We think of obituaries. We think of land records. We think of, all of those kinds of things. But some of the things we may not think of is work histories or things like that. So this is not a picture of my family, but it does represent what some of my family members did during the day. I had ancestors that were breaker boys in coal mines when they were 6 years old. This is a picture of breaker boys in a coal mine. I have a 6-year-old grandson, and I can't imagine what it would be like to have to help support your family in this way. These little boys right here were between probably 5 and 11. And they have that man standing over them. Actually, that is a boy who's probably 13, maybe, with what looks like possibly a whip or a stick or something in their hand. They sit there from like 5 in the morning until 7, sometimes 8 o'clock at night. And those chutes are sending coal down to them, and they are picking out impurities and things like that out of the coal. So they're sitting there, bent, their backs are bent over, and they're just sitting there all day, and they just have to work and work and work. And that boy standing over them, hits them on the back or on the shoulders if they don't look like they're working fast enough. They are there all day long, 6 days a week, and sometimes 7. And I can't imagine that. I can't imagine what it would have been like. When my ancestors came from Lithuania, truthfully, I talked to my great grandmother, and I remember her saying that they left Lithuania because they heard the streets in America were paved with gold. They moved into a mining town that, like most places, had kind of a pecking order. Well, the Italians were at the bottom of that pecking order until the Lithuanians moved in. And guess what? The Lithuanians then became the bottom of the heap. And that's when my family members moved in, and all of a sudden they were at the bottom of the heap. This picture represents my grandmother, although this isn't my grandmother. My grandmother was a bobbin girl in the local silk mill when she was 9 years old. She worked 12 to 14-hour days until she was 13, when she became a domestic for another family. She did that until she married my grandfather at age 24. And one of the things that my grandmother said is, when she got married, her mother, the only thing she gave her when she got married was a handkerchief. And I sensed that my grandmother and her mother didn't get along very well, because she always said the only thing I was good for was my paycheck, which made me really, really sad. So it was, I wish I would have written down more of those stories, but I didn't. I grew up in Nevada. My grandparents were in Pennsylvania, And my dad, truthfully, was the black sheep of the family. So there wasn't a whole lot of connection there. But I wish there was more connection, and so I'm too late perhaps, but I'm learning a little more about what that family life was like. Here is a timesheet from a mine in Pennsylvania. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you found something like this about your ancestor? Again, this is a representation of what my mining ancestors might have had. A timesheet. They checked in, they checked out, how many hours they worked. You know, could you imagine going underground at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning? You go in when it's dark, you come out when it's dark. Here are some more examples of what can be found on Linkpendium. This is a static page, which means it doesn't change. It's and this was contributed in the late 2000s. These are text files. And if you look on the left-hand side, where you've got a file name and then a description, then you've got the date and the submitter. If you click on them, this is what you can see. And I actually found this is from a archive of obituaries, and this is for a little infant, Veronica Milauskis, and she is actually a collateral relative, and she's an infant that passed away. But this was something that was just submitted by a person with an AOL account in October of 2008. My, we've come a long way, haven't we? But it's nice to know that this is here. And I just happened upon it when I was looking at options for this class. Here is a listing that someone contributed from genealogybuff.com. And this record is part of an alphabetized list of marriages and deaths from the Wyoming, Pennsylvania Historical Society. And a lot of these things that I found on Linkpendium, they were lists of whatever that people have just gotten from different places and they decided to share. And like I said, a lot of these came from a time where we didn't have the internet connections that we do now. We didn't have the ways to share, but this was something they contributed. They typed it out themselves. They sent it to Linkpendium, or they had some way they sent it to Linkpendium, and either Linkpendium typed it up, or however they did. At that point, a lot of them was they posted it on another site and then they linked to it, because it is just a whole bunch of links. So this was the beginning, and I'm glad that they've got this here. And although right now we tend to think of all the bigger players in the genealogy field, I wouldn't discount these players either. I've found a lot of really fun information. Here's an example of what Linkpendium has under probate records. Notice that the years covered are 1683 to 1985. And now you look at the source, says Family Search. So yes, you will find these under probate records on Family Search, but I was looking at other things that they had listed here. If you look up at the top, you've got Nanticoke City Directories, you've got Pittston City Directories, you've got Luzerne County Public Records. There's all sorts of interesting things that you can find that maybe is considered ephemera or extra things, not always name, dates, and places, but I consider them just as important as names, dates, and places. Here is the front page for one of the volumes of history for Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, from the Internet Archives website. I wouldn't have even known about this history if I hadn't looked here. This was a locality search, and here's the history of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, Volume 1, and the source is Internet Archive. Did you know that you can download whole books from the Internet Archive? There's so many on Internet Archive are out of copyright protection and in the public domain. And you may find a whole library that you can download to help with your family history, so definitely check it out. In my experience, Internet Archive seems to be very underutilized. Don't discount old message boards. You never know what you might find. Look at the dates on this page. At the bottom, On the right-hand side, it says some messages from 2013, but the top few posts are from December 2022. I imagine these new messages are from people just trying to cover all of their possible bases, which is what I try to do too. This site has a listing of books people own with links and descriptions to what is in those books. They also have a page that will tell you exactly what you have to do to request a copy of something in that book. Remember that these were posted on the Roots website long before the current technology of Facebook and the other social media sites. And I like this section because you know what? If I look at the top, early Pennsylvania birth, 1675 to 1875, what if I had somebody in that, maybe in that Graybill Cemetery, maybe I knew I had somebody in there, but I didn't know where I could find somebody that could look it up for me. I could just make a request here and be able to connect and have somebody look it up for me. And I'd be very happy to do that. Like I said, I know a lot of it sounds like old school technology, but you know what? I'm grateful for old school technology. Sometimes I get farther with old school technology than I do with the current technology. So how many of you have heard of penny postcards? What are penny postcards? Penny postcards cost 1 cent to mail, but from 1917 to 1919 and 1925 to 1928, they cost 2 cents to cover the cost of World War I. And then I noticed on this it said from 1925 to 1928, they weren't sure the reason for the latter cost of 2 cents. So let me show you an example of one of the postcards. These were all in hands of private collectors, and they're just shown for the heck of it. None of them are for sale. But there is a picture of one of the breakers in the area where my grandparents grew up. This is the coal breaker in Glen Lyon, Pennsylvania, where lots of my uncles, most of them named Joseph and Anthony, worked in. The breaker no longer stands, and the town is barely surviving. But the stories remain. For those who don't know what a coal breaker is, here's Wikipedia's definition. A coal breaker is a coal processing plant which breaks down coal into various useful sizes. Coal breakers also remove impurities from the coal, and they typically remove slate and deposit them in the culm dump. The coal breaker is a forerunner of the modern coal preparation plant. Here's another interesting thing that I found. This obituary has nothing to do with my family, at least the person that passed away. But here's an obituary for a person using the Shaquitas Funeral Home at 232 Zerby Avenue in Kingston. Anthony Shaquitas was one of the pallbearers. The fun thing is this is 232 Zerby Avenue in Kingston, Pennsylvania, as of October of 2022, when I was there visiting. Anthony and his brother actually named William, not Joseph. There is a Joseph in there too. Anthony passed away in 1980 and his brother William in 1989. This is just a regular residence now, but it was fun to see that funeral home, the Shaquitas Funeral Home, was named in this obituary. It brings it home to me to see that actual home. And like I said, not names, dates, and places, but it connects to my family history and it's a story. And last but not least, let's wrap up with, let me introduce you to Coal Speak. Since my dad's side of the family grew up in coal country, I got a kick out of this dictionary. So let me introduce you to a few fun little things. I can't go with you now. How's about after later? After later means later. Or do you want an or court? Do you want another court or a court? Or courts, which is one court. I heard this. My grandfather said this a lot. Antony, meaning Anthony. So you could probably in his house scream Antony, and half the city would, or half the little town would come running because everybody was named Anthony. My grandpa also said this: I need some aspirin. I got a headache. Aspirin. So I always wondered why some of my grandfather's words were so goofy. Maybe this is my answer. He spoke coal. And there you have it. That is my very brief introduction to Linkpendium. I encourage you to get on Linkpendium and do your own search for whatever state that you have family in, and you never know what you're going to come up with, whatever. I think it'll be fun. It won't be what you expect. Trust me. Linkpendium is free, and you just go and look to your heart's content. It has all sorts of really interesting things on it, but set your timer because you can get lost looking at various assorted interesting things. So definitely set a timer because you will lose lots of time.
Thank you so much, Sister Melick.